He believed he was on the verge of revealing something about Donald Trump, but in a surprising turn, Melania seized the microphone and turned the tables on him. The events that unfolded next reverberated throughout the online world. The vibrant red live sign flickered to life, casting an exhilarating glow across the studio. The audience nestled into their seats, whispers of excitement rippling through the air. This wasn't merely another segment. It was the tonight, and America was tuned in. At the polished glass table, Brian Lasker, the country's most vocal liberal host, straightened his tie and leaned in, his fingers intertwined like someone ready to make a decisive move. The anticipation had been building for days, with his network hinting at an in-depth exploration of the latest Trump scandal. The ratings were anticipated to be off the charts. This evening, Brian's voice pierced the subtle murmur of chatter. We're presenting you with a raw, unvarnished glimpse into the most astonishing revelation regarding Donald Trump to date. The audience burst into a cacophony of applause and cheers, with a few isolated boos mingling in the mix. Brian greeted them all with a familiar smile. Dispute ignited his journey, and this evening he was adding fuel to the flames. In a luxurious penthouse suite nestled somewhere in the city, Melania Trump reclined in a high-backed chair, her gaze fixed on the unfolding broadcast. The expansive flat-screen television commanded attention in the contemporary living room, emitting a stark light that contrasted sharply with the immaculate white walls. She had encountered these segments previously. Brian had established a reputation for himself by targeting her husband. Nothing was new, yet there was an unmistakable sense of difference in the air tonight. Melania's grip on her wine glass grew firmer. Her hair, cascading in gentle waves, encircled a face that held an air of mystery. She had honed the skill of self-control, refined the impassive demeanor. Yet within, a transformation was taking place. On the screen, Brian pressed on. Let's get straight to the point. It's no secret that Donald Trump flourishes in the midst of controversy. But this most recent disclosure? Even his most devoted followers may struggle to justify his actions at this point. A striking graphic illuminated the screen, with bold letters commanding attention. The reality behind Trump unveiled. Melania's lips formed a tight, straight line. The crowd erupted in applause. Brian allowed the moment to stretch, absorbing the palpable tension. He was as much an entertainer as he was a reporter, fully aware of how to engage an audience. This goes beyond mere policies. This isn't about party lines, he continued, his voice lowering to a whisper, as if sharing a secret. This narrative revolves around an individual who has deceived the citizens of America. Once more, the lens focused tightly, highlighting the weight of his statements. Melania released a slow breath. This was precisely what she had anticipated. Increased allegations, selectively chosen snippets, context-removed footage, and headlines designed to provoke the highest level of indignation. Brian faced his guest, a former insider now critical of Trump, a man who had once dined with Melania, exchanging smiles across expansive mahogany tables, pretending to be a friend. Now he had arrived to share his narrative. The guest spoke with a heavy heart. It's worse than we thought. Silence fell over the crowd. Melania's fingers drummed lightly against the glass she held. Trump was aware of this. He meticulously arranged it. The words struck with the force of a hammer. Melania tensed. She was unaware of what this truly was. Yet the boldness of it sent her heart racing. She was far from naive. She understood her husband's potential, his boldness, his strategic disorder, yet she was equally aware of the media's influence. She understood the way men like Brian crafted their stories, how they presented a carefully constructed script to incite outrage, and tonight, her husband had been cast as the antagonist. Once more, the crowd inhaled sharply. A whirlwind of responses surged across social media instantaneously. The hashtag began to gain traction. #Trump revealed. Unveiling the truth behind hashtags. Melania's silence resonates profoundly. Melania's jaw tightened. She was not one to display sudden bursts of emotion. Her whole public persona was crafted with precision, with grace, with meticulously chosen phrases. Yet this evening, there was an unmistakable shift. She leaned forward, extending her hand toward the remote, the screen shimmering in her piercing blue gaze. Brian continued to speak, captivating the audience with each word he uttered. Esteemed audience, we stand on the brink of a pivotal moment that could redefine our future. Melania let out a breath. She could remain in her usual spot, observing as she always had. She could allow the story to unravel, permitting the world to once more shape her husband, shape her without her input, or she could take action. Her fingers lingered above the phone resting next to her. A solitary call had the power to alter the trajectory of this evening, and for the first time in ages, Melania sensed a compelling need to shatter the stillness. Yet, was she prepared for the consequences that might follow? Melania remained still for a moment. The phone lingered beside her, still and expectant. Was she truly contemplating this? Amidst the noise of the crowd, Brian's voice pierced through, commanding attention. "We possess unique documents," he remarked, striking a hefty folder on the desk for emphasis. "Clear evidence that Trump has, once more, misled the American public." The lens drew closer, heightening the intensity of the scene. The crowd shifted in anticipation. Social media was in a frenzy, hashtags proliferating at an astonishing rate. Melania's hold on the remote grew firmer. For years, she observed the headlines distort reality, witnessed self-proclaimed insiders peddle their narratives, and saw the world shape its opinions about her husband, her family, her marriage, all without grasping the complete truth. She ought to disregard it. The safest choice was clear, yet Brian's voice continued to urge him forward. "Before we unveil this, let's delve into what it signifies for Melania Trump," he continued, reclining with a nearly self-satisfied demeanor. "For years, individuals have pondered, what is the extent of her knowledge? What is her true level of concern?" The audience erupted in laughter. She remains by his side, expressionless, regardless of the controversy, regardless of the deceit. He glanced at his guest, the former Trump insider, a smirk playing on his lips. "Do you think she genuinely believes him, or is she merely acting her role?" Melania sensed a fiery surge within her chest. The guest let out a heavy sigh, as though this question had been a burden on his very spirit. He remarked that she seems to lack any options. "It seems she is ensnared." The crowd inhaled sharply. The term lingered in the atmosphere. Ensnared. Melania gazed at the screen, momentarily taken aback. Confined. As though she were merely a marionette, a fragile, compliant figure devoid of autonomy, lacking any influence over her own existence. They were unfamiliar with her. They were unaware of the countless nights she had spent planning alongside her husband, the intense loyalty that simmered beneath her calm facade. They were unaware of the sacrifices, the strategic decisions, the manner in which she had mastered the art of maneuvering through a realm where each action, each breath was scrutinized, judged, examined. And now this man, this betrayer who once shared her meals, had the nerve to voice his opinions in her name. Brian pivoted toward the camera, feeling the vibrant atmosphere enveloping him. He was in the zone now. "Melania, if you're watching," he said with a sardonic grin, "blink twice if you require assistance." The audience burst into laughter, and a switch flipped within Melania. She seized her phone. The screen illuminated the shadowy space as she navigated to the number she never imagined she would call in such a situation. A direct connection to the network. She paused for just a moment. Then she hit the call button. Back in the studio, Brian continued to bask in the joy of laughter. He flourished in instances like this, when control was undeniably his, when the crowd hung on his every word. Suddenly, a producer's voice pierced the chaos through his earpiece. "Hey Brian, you won't believe what just happened." Brian hardly glanced away, a smirk lingering on his face. "Challenge me." The producer paused, contemplating the next move. At that moment, Melania Trump is on the line. Exist. Stillness. The audience's laughter dwindled as Brian's demeanor changed. "Excuse me, could you clarify that?" Sudden chaos erupted in the control room. "She is currently on the line. She desires to express herself." For the first time that night, Brian appeared truly unsettled. This was not meant to unfold this way. Melania consistently chose not to engage with media criticisms. She stood as a quiet, unreachable presence. The enigma, and still here she stood. A gradual smile spread over his features. This was a present. "Connect her," he said with a calm confidence, adjusting his posture. His fingers curled against the table, eyes shining with eager expectation. He faced the camera once more, his voice fluid and rehearsed. "Good evening, everyone. It appears we have an extraordinary guest with us this evening." Silence enveloped the crowd. Even the ex-Trump confidant appeared unsettled. With a decisive motion, Brian activated the button on the elegant control panel before him. The connection was established. "Melania Trump," he remarked, his voice laced with amusement. "You are currently broadcasting live." A moment of stillness. Then the sound of her voice. Serene. Awesome. Cutting and precise. "Exercise caution in your words regarding those you are unfamiliar with, Brian." The crowd inhaled sharply. Yet that was merely the start. The stillness in the studio lingered, dense and unforeseen. Brian Lasker, ever ready with a retort, parted his lips, yet silence enveloped him. For the first time that night he felt a loss of control. Melania's voice, clear and unwavering, sliced through the atmosphere with precision. "It's wise to tread lightly when discussing those you aren't familiar with, Brian." Her tone was deliberate, yet the underlying warning was unmistakable. Brian bounced back swiftly, reclining in his chair with a sly grin. "Melania Trump, ladies and gentlemen," he proclaimed, gesturing expansively. The crowd laughed softly, while some appeared truly captivated. This was unfamiliar. This came as a surprise. This was a woman who had never stepped forward to defend her husband before. "Melania," Brian continued, his voice steady and composed. "I must confess, your call tonight caught me by surprise. Your husband's scandals often go unspoken, revealing their own truths." A handful of laughs echoed from the audience. Melania remained silent. "I reached out and she responded, pointing out that you're perched there, assuming the role of judge and jury, as if you have any insight into my marriage, my existence. However, that is not the case." Her accent, typically gentle and measured, carried a sharpness this evening. The whispers among the crowd intensified. Brian's smirk remained unwavering. He appeared to be quite entertained. "Very well, I'm intrigued. Now that you're present, please share with me. Are you in favor of your husband's actions?" Quietude. A momentary break that compels everyone to lean in closer. "Then, you think I'm reaching out to clarify my husband's decisions?" Melania said, her tone calm and measured. "I'm not," Brian said, blinking. She pressed on, stating that she was reaching out because she was weary of men like him feigning concern for women while reducing them to mere jokes in his acts. The crowd moved. A fleeting change danced across Brian's expression, barely noticeable, yet significant. Then he chuckled, perhaps a bit too boisterously, a laugh that seemed rehearsed and dismissive. "Melania," he remarked, shaking his head in disbelief, "you are not the subject of anyone's jokes. We are delving into genuine matters, authentic corruption. If that makes you uneasy, what truly unsettles me," she cut in, her tone now more cutting, "is how you remain there, night after night, feigning concern for justice when all you truly seek is a headline." The crowd responded. Brian's smirk wavered for a brief moment, but he still had more to say. "You're frustrated because we're revealing the reality," he replied, leaning in closer now. "If your husband is truly innocent, what is the source of your anger?" Yet another moment of stillness. Then, Melania chuckled. Not a harsh sound, not a strained one, but a soft, understanding, almost playful chuckle. Brian's demeanor shifted to one of gloom. "Do you believe I'm angry?" she inquired. "I'm not upset. I'm amused." The audience was truly captivated. Brian had anticipated a reaction of defensiveness, anger, or perhaps even a quiet withdrawal. This was something he had never anticipated. "What's amusing about being laid bare?" he questioned, his hold on the desk growing firmer. Text the way you carry yourself as if you have no fear, Melania remarked plainly. As though you are a profound seeker of truth, a man who confronts authority. Her voice lowered, now tinged with a chill. However, the reality is that you pursue others only when the situation is secure. Brian's smirk faded away. You target individuals who are already despised by the media. You express what resonates with your audience, ensuring their applause continues for you. The audience held their breath in stillness. You're not courageous, Brian, Melania concluded. Your patterns are quite evident. For the first time that night, Brian found himself at a loss for words. The crowd whispered, adjusting their positions in the chairs. Melania allowed the silence to linger for a moment, then added, her words barely above a whisper, as if delivering a final, decisive blow. You label me as confined, yet I believe we both understand who is truly ensnared in a part they cannot break free from. Brian's jaw tightened. The cameras continued to capture every moment. The buzz on social media was already electric, but the evening had more in store, as Brian Lasker was determined to ensure Melania Trump wouldn't have the final say. The atmosphere in the studio crackled with intensity. The crowd, previously vibrant and involved, now remained in a state of shocked quietude. Even those who hold a strong disdain for Donald Trump, gathered here tonight to witness his name being dismantled, couldn't overlook the unfolding events. Melania Trump had just accomplished something that took everyone by surprise. She had turned the tables. Brian Lasker, a true master of his craft, was determined to maintain command of his own performance. He managed a smile, shaking his head slightly. Well, Melania, I must say, you seem much more expressive when you're not beside your husband. A handful of muted laughs echoed from the audience, yet their mirth was no longer as unrestrained. Melania's voice was composed and unwavering, and one tends to feel less assured when faced with direct challenges. Brian's fingers danced lightly on the desk. The control room was alive with urgency in his earpiece, his producer pressing him to regain command. But how is that possible? He had beckoned the tempest, and now he found himself at its heart. Okay, Brian said, leaning in, changing his approach. Are you ready to discuss courage? Let's have a conversation. Melania remained silent. She allowed him to focus on his task. Brian perceives the opportunity. You label me as predictable, yet let's face the truth. You are the one assuming a character. The poised, graceful spouse. The woman who beams and gestures warmly while positioned beside a man charged with. He abruptly halted his words, yet the suggestion lingered in the atmosphere. Melania exhaled slowly. Then she began to speak. You think I'm standing up for my husband. A moment of stillness. I am standing up for myself. Brian opened his eyes wide. That was not the response he anticipated. Melania pressed on, her tone fluid and measured. You sit here and assert that I am confined, that I am merely acting, that I lack the strength to voice my thoughts. She inclined her head just a bit. And yet here I find myself expressing my thoughts. The crowd moved. I wonder, Melania added, how you would feel if I began to make assumptions about your wife. Brian's smirk disappeared. The space seemed more confined. Melania's voice was gentle yet resolute. You speak of me as if I lack agency, as though I exist merely as a complement to someone else's narrative. She lingered for a moment, allowing the significance of that land to settle in. And still, you would never permit anyone to speak of your wife in such a manner. Could you? Brian's jaw clenched. For the first time, he appeared uneasy. All eyes were on him at that moment. Not as the intrepid reporter, but as an individual abruptly faced with his own contradictions. You assert your support for women, Melania continued. Yet solely those who share your perspective. Just those who align with your story. Yet another moment of stillness. And that is the reason you hold a dislike for me. Brian parted his lips, yet silence enveloped him. The crowd fell into a hush. This isn't how it was meant to unfold. He was meant to steer the dialogue. He was meant to be the one revealing inconsistencies. Yet here he stood, dissected under the spotlight of his own creation. And he was aware of it. What about Melania? Her expression was devoid of a smile. She wasn't boasting. She was just biding her time. She had expressed her thoughts, and now it was up to Brian to determine his reply. However, the issue with individuals such as Brian Lasker, they seemed to lack a sense of when to draw the line. It was now his turn to take action. The stillness in the studio lingered for a moment longer than it should have. Brian Lasker, ever agile in his thoughts, appeared to be at a crossroads, weighing two distinct paths. He had the option to shift gears, dismiss the situation, take charge once more, or he could choose to commit even further. He opted for the latter. Brian managed a smirk, yet it failed to illuminate his eyes. "Very well, Melania," he replied, his voice strained, yet still performing for the audience. "Are you looking to focus on me? All right, but let's keep in mind the purpose of our gathering." He seized the folder on his desk, raising it dramatically. "The citizens of America are entitled to clarity. Your spouse has been untruthful repeatedly, and you, whether you appreciate it or not, have been by his side through every moment." He opened the folder with a quick motion, his eyes scanning over the notes inside. "May I pose a question to you? Do you genuinely trust everything he claims? Or is it all just an act? An inquiry laden with implications? A snare?" The crowd shifted in anticipation. Brian leaned back, a sly grin returning to his face. He believed he finally had her in his grasp. However, Melania? She acted without a moment's pause. "I believe," she said, "that you prioritize headlines over the truth." Brian's smirk wavered. The crowd responded with a unified gasp of awe. Melania's voice was calm, unwavering, almost unnaturally so. "You behave as though this is merely a matter of facts, yet we both understand that if the truth favored me, you wouldn't allow it to be revealed." Brian let out a derisive laugh. "Oh, come on." She refused to let him cut in. "I observe how you narrate tales," she continued. "You don't just report, you take action." Brian's fingers curled tightly against the table. "And you aren't bothered that my husband is dishonest," she added. "You feel frustrated that his fabrications hold more weight than yours." The crowd inhaled sharply. Brian's expression grew somber. He parted his lips, only to seal them once more. What could he possibly respond to that? For the first time in his career, his familiar strategies were failing him. Melania Trump, the figure often perceived as aloof, strategic, and reserved, was here, analyzing him with the precision of a skilled surgeon. Brian had devoted years to tearing people down. However, this evening, he was the one who was being laid bare. The crowd could sense it. The atmosphere in the control room was palpable. What about the internet? It had already burst forth. Messages were soaring through the digital air. The comments on the live stream were pouring in. Did Melania just take down Brian on his own show? The course of events has deviated from our intentions. She remains steadfast. This is absolutely unbelievable. I may not be a fan of Trump, but I have to admit, she makes a valid argument. Brian felt a buzz in his earpiece. His producer filled with anxiety now. "Let's discuss something else. Take back the reins. Conclude it." Brian clenched his jaw tightly. Melania lingered in quiet anticipation, her thoughts swirling in the stillness. She took her time. She remained calm. She expressed everything she intended to convey. As the silence lingered, the situation only grew more dire. To Brian, now all eyes were on him as he fought to overcome his challenges. The audience no longer viewed Melania as a confined spouse. They regarded Brian as though he were trapped, with nowhere to escape. And that was not a situation he was accustomed to finding himself in. He let out a quick breath, pushing out another chuckle. "Well, Melania," he declared, straightening his posture, reclaiming his charismatic tone. "That was quite intriguing." A laugh from the crowd, yet it seemed contrived at this point. "Inform your husband that we will be meeting him in court," Brian concluded, delivering a parting shot. Melania let out a gentle breath. Then she ended the call. Tap. The connection was lost. The studio lay in stillness. For the very first time in his professional journey, Brian Lasker found himself devoid of words. Yet beyond the confines of the studio, the world was beginning to respond. The studio was enveloped in an unsettling silence. The crowd, once enthusiastic in their applause for Brian's every utterance, now lingered in uncertainty, casting sidelong looks at one another. It felt like they were poised, anticipating the signal to respond. Brian Lasker, a master of crafting stories, now found himself in front of the cameras, laid bare. He had relinquished his grip. Once more, his earpiece buzzed, but this time with a sense of urgency. The producer's voice pierced the stillness. "We are currently managing the situation. Let go and continue forward. Quick." Brian managed a strained smile, concealing his annoyance. He faced the camera. He let out a strained laugh, saying, "Well, that took me by surprise." A handful of sporadic chuckles. "Insufficient." She reached out, he persisted, struggling to maintain authority. She expressed her thoughts. However, let's face the truth. Did she truly provide any answers? A few members of the audience offered their applause. Not enough. Brian's hold on the desk grew firmer. He sensed it now. The transition. This was meant to be a segment that captured headlines for all the right reasons. A dismantling. Another viral moment establishing him as an unflinching reporter. Instead, Melania had completely transformed the narrative. He could already envision the clips making their way across the vast expanse of the internet. The focus had shifted away from Trump in the headlines. They revolved around him. The eruption on social media had already commenced. Brian Lasker just faced a lesson on his own platform. Melania presented him with his own script and urged him to read it aloud. "I'm not a supporter of Trump," yet she raised some valid arguments. This was not part of the plan. Incredible. The responses poured in, divided between those who continued to support Brian and those who had just experienced something they found difficult to comprehend. Regardless of people's opinions on Donald Trump, this evening was not centered around him. This evening revolved around Melania. For the first time, she was perceived not as the quiet spouse, nor as a mere background presence, but as something wholly different. In the quiet of Melania's penthouse, the soft flicker of the television cast a gentle light upon her features. The performance had progressed. Brian had swiftly moved on to the next segment. His voice was strained and tense, struggling to regain a semblance of authority. Melania had lost interest in watching. Her phone buzzed with anticipation. Messages, phone calls, messages from individuals she hadn't communicated with in ages. Some aides from the White House appeared to be in a rush, trying to assess if a statement was necessary. She paid them no mind. Instead, she grasped the remote and switched off the television. For years, she had remained in silence. Allow them to speak. Allow them to weave their narratives. However, this evening she had expressed her own thoughts. And the world was attentive. Yet, the lingering question was what would unfold next. The urban skyline sprawled infinitely beyond Melania's penthouse windows, illuminating the chic contemporary interior with a soft radiance. After what seemed like an eternity, the silence carried a new weight. Not the quiet of limitation, not the quiet of perseverance, yet the quietude of a change unfolding. Once more, her phone buzzed with a vibration. Yet another call, another piece of writing. She failed to verify the identity of the caller. She was already aware. Across town, in the bustling war room of the newsroom, Brian Lasker was pacing back and forth. His producer was issuing directives with urgency. Team members were fixated on their displays, monitoring real-time responses. "What's the cost?" Brian insisted. A young employee, looking somewhat frail and uncertain, cleared his throat. "It seems that the trending topics are not aligning with our expectations." Brian scowled. "What does it mean?" The employee swallowed. "My dear sir, the conversation is not centered around Trump. It is you." The atmosphere was still. Brian's jaw clenched. Throughout the nation, individuals were engrossed in the viral videos, perusing the discussions, analyzing each phrase. She remained calm. She moved with grace. She remained unyielding. Why do those who profess to advocate for women seem to only honor those who share their views? Perhaps our understanding of Melania Trump is not as deep as we assumed. Express your thoughts freely. Yet she confined Brian to a corner and abandoned him there. Even commentators from opposing networks, who had previously shown little favor towards Melania, were recognizing the significance of the moment. One commentator acknowledged that she accomplished something unusual. She turned the tables. She didn't portray herself as a victim. She stood firm in the face of pressure. She overshadowed Brian. The host sitting opposite him let out a weary sigh. What's even more frustrating, he brought this upon himself. Returning to the penthouse, Melania at last reached for her phone. Instead of diving into texts or scrolling through social media, reach out and call one person. The phone rang once, twice, and then Melania. Donald Trump's voice resonated, his tone enigmatic. A moment of silence lingered between them. Then he released a soft laugh. I watched the performance. She remained silent. You did well, he added. His voice tinged with an emotion he seldom acknowledged. Confidence. She remained silent, not due to a desire for his validation, but because, for the first time, she found herself free from the need for anyone's. She had expressed her thoughts, and the world had taken heed. This moment transcended mere politics. The focus wasn't on Trump, Brian Lasker, or the media apparatus. It revolved around the nuances of perception and the dynamics of power, highlighting the simplicity with which one can form assumptions about another's identity in the absence of words. Melania had remained quiet for years. Individuals embraced that silence and crafted their own narrative for her, until she crafted her own. Perhaps that's the takeaway from everything we've experienced. The world will forever seek to label you. They will draw conclusions, craft stories, and create images that align with their objectives. Ultimately, it is solely your choice to interpret the true significance of your silence. When the moment arrives, will you allow others to narrate your tale? Or will you seize the microphone and share your story yourself? If this resonated with you, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. What are your thoughts? Has Melania finally unveiled a part of herself that the world has yet to witness?